Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm David Bird with Reality Reimagined. I'm an award-winning photographer and Photoshop artist that specializes in fantasy composite art. And today we're going to have Photoshop education. Isn't that exciting? Because it's been an incredibly long time since we had Photoshop education on this channel. And whose fault is that? Is it your fault, Bueller? No, it's my fault. And the reason why is because I wanted certain elements of content for the shop vlog, for the retouching series and so forth, that I needed to record and photograph and get assets together, and that was just not quite possible to do with COVID. And as the COVID cases rose in Arizona and things got even more dangerous, I became a little bit more afraid of going out and capturing those things. So I've only been working with people that I know and trust, that are socially distancing, wearing masks and so forth, because I don't want to die of Rona. I just don't. So, but I was able to finally get into the studio, get the images and the things that I need and the different assets that we can now finally return to some Photoshop education where we left off, both with the shop vlog and with the retouching series, talking about retouching hair in human subjects, retouching hair in animals and so forth. I have no expertise on that. However, today we're going to have episode 9 of the shop vlog, where we're going to be editing a guest's artist image from start to art and going through the entire process with you. Now, in the description below is the time code chapters for everything that I'll cover in today's video. So if we're going to go over things like frequency separation and dodging and burning, and you already feel confident about that, feel free to skip ahead. But also in the description below is the link to the Reality Reimagined website, where you'll be able to purchase the new brushes that I'll be demonstrating in today's video. So enough flapping my gums, let's get to the education and to the Photoshops and begin episode 9 of the shop vlog. This image of this lovely young lady was sent in by my wonderful friend Josie with Jocelyn Wright Photography. You can see more of her amazing artwork by visiting the Instagram account at the link below. So I want to say a couple of things before we begin. First and foremost, on the shop vlog, when I edit a guest's artist image, anything that I do to the image is simply my artistic interpretation of their artwork and what I would do with it in Photoshop. Any changes or anything that I talk about in it is not meant as a derogatory remark against the artwork of Josie or anybody who sends in an image. It's simply talking about what I see and what I want to do with the artwork itself. And secondly, I want to say to my friend Josie that I'm incredibly proud of you. And I think you already know that, but you have chosen to build a business in an industry that drives us mad. And you and I have been in those trenches too many times, going mad at what we see in our industry and that what surrounds us. And you have persevered through all of those challenges and have consistently kept building a brand that represents great artwork and integrity and honesty. And I am incredibly proud, and I admire your achievements and what you have done. Keep doing what you're doing, keep pushing through, keep selling those black label packages, and I am so excited to see how far you're going to go in this industry. Thank you for your friendship and your support, and for letting me edit this image of yours today on the episode of the shop vlog. So let's get started and talk about what I see in the image and build a battle plan of what we're going to do in this work today. So this is a high school senior. She's got a beautiful smile on her face. I love the sweater, the jeans. It's awesome. But the background doesn't match the emotions of what we see in the subject. It's a cloudy day, and it looks like Josie was using artificial lights with a flash off camera left, because we can see the specular highlights in the subject's eyes, as well as the shadow displacement on document right behind the kid. So instantaneously, from an emotional perspective, I'm disconnected because I love the smile. I love the warmth of what we see there, but the background and the cloudy sky just doesn't match that. Now, I was a high school senior portrait photographer for a very long time, and I understand the pomp and circumstance that goes into this type of session. And the subjects, the clients, they get excited, and they hair and makeup, and they pick all their clothes, and they wake up the day of the shoot to see that it's cloudy outside, and they inevitably call the studio and say, hey, can we change our date because we want a bright and sunny day? Well, sometimes you can't acquiesce to that request, and you have to go forward and do the best you can on the nature and the weather that was provided to you on that day. So that's where Photoshop can definitely come in. But I want to offer a bit of advice here, because when we look at this, my intent is to change that sky, to change it to a bright sunny day or a brighter mood into the image. And we can certainly let Photoshop take that step for us. But from a business perspective, be careful what you offer to your clients when it comes to a lot of heavy Photoshop work and compositing. Because if you are trying to convince them to go through the shoot, even though it's cloudy, and you say, look, I can just Photoshop the pictures, they're going to want you to do everything, and they're going to have you go to great lengths to change the nature of the day to be something else. And that's okay of a request for them to make because they want what they want, but it is okay for you to charge for that. And make sure you earn your dollars for the work that you can do. There is nothing wrong with having a great skill set inside of Photoshop and making that available to your clients with a barrier to entry that they've got to pay for. So it would be my practice to have them choose 2 or 3 images that are their favorites. And let's say this is one of them. And we would say, look, we're going to change the sky to a blue, partly cloudy day and make everything look bright and sunny and airy and wonderful. And we just need you to buy a 16 by 20 wall portrait with this image. And then we will go to that length and do that type of artwork. So again, be careful what you suggest, but make sure that you're earning the dollars that you are worth for the work that you're going to put into the artwork itself. So let's get started. I'm in Adobe Camera Raw. I'm using Adobe Photoshop 2020 because Adobe Photoshop 2021 is broken. It's horribly broken. So I'm back into the 2020. We're in Adobe Camera Raw, and it is the newest version of Adobe Camera Raw working on a 16-bit image. Let's get started. So I know that I'm going to wind up changing the sky, and I'm going to try to brighten up the image to match the warmth and beauty of her smile and what we see into this image here. But I also want to do something else. Now, there's a general rule of thumb in photography, and once you learn the rules, you can break them. But generally, you do not want the horizon line to come anywhere near the head of a subject. And so in this case, technically, the horizon line is not going through the head of the subject, but this leading line of the trees, we're kind of fighting that right now. We're working against it to connect with her. I want to move this landscape of the trees and the water down just a little bit so that the leading lines of the trees will kind of lead inevitably up into her, and that the trees and the horizon line will be going through the middle of her chest or at the bottom of her rib cage. This is going to help to do a couple things. One, it changes the audience's perspective to the subject. So it's going to help lower it just a little bit so that we can connect to her just a little bit more. But it also fills the most important part of the image, which is her face, into the negative space up into the clouds. So it again helps the audience to find focus and connect to the subject. So from a photography perspective, I would have liked if Josie would have went a little bit further down to the ground so that we can change that angle and have that tree line, again, cutting through her torso in some shape or form instead of her head fighting against that. But it's an easy fix in Photoshop, relatively easy fix in Photoshop, and it's something we're going to explore in today's video. We're going to do some compositing. But what we need to do is to prepare the image and get a base and foundation to start working with the idea in mind that we're going to brighten up the image and change the entire weather pattern of the day. So let's start working with the image. I'm going to come to the Optics tab first and check both of these boxes to remove chromatic aberrations and use profile corrections. That's going to overcome the issues of the lens, so it's going to not make the image so distorted because of the convex nature of the glass, and then also get rid of some of that vignette and make the image just a little bit brighter. Now I'm going to come to the Basic tab. And again, I want to start addressing this image from a place of preparing it for neutrality, meaning that I want to not make this picture look pretty and beautiful right now at this first pass in ACR. I'm simply trying to prepare foundations for compositing. And part of that is to prepare foundations that pay respect to the 3 fundamentals of Photoshop that I talk about all the time in all the various videos on this channel. Those 3 fundamentals to me are color, luminosity, and detail. Those 3 elements combined help us to not only understand what to do with an image, but at any stage of working with the image, what we need to do with it. So at this point, looking at a luminosity perspective, I want to start pulling out some of the shadows so that we get some detail back into these trees. Why? Well, let's use our imagination and go on a journey. I want to imagine that the sky in the background is actually a blue sky, partly cloudy day where we've got sunlight and it's bright and airy. Well, if we start pulling out the shadows in those trees, and I zoom in just a little bit, we're starting to see some separation between highlight and shadow so that we have areas that are darker, we have areas that are brighter. The brighter areas would naturally be illuminated if it was a brighter day outside. So by pulling out the shadows, this is where we were, and this is where we are now. I'm helping to create more of that sense of highlight and shadow, which will just go hand in hand with the overall light perspective of the day as we're making everything feel a little bit brighter. So pulling out the shadows just a touch, I'm also going to pull out the black point just a little bit in the entire image. I'm not trying to like flatten everything out. I'm just trying to make it neutral so that I can start working on the image to add highlights where I want them to be and also match the sky stock to the luminosity values of the original image itself. And we'll get to that in just a little bit in the video here. So I'm going to increase the white point just a little bit. I want to add just a little bit overall brightness to everything. We'll go ahead and let's actually pull the highlights down. I'm looking at her face and her highlights are just a little too strong from the light there. So I'm going to pull those down. The contrast, let's go ahead and push in a little bit of contrast. No, let's pull it out. I'm afraid if we keep too much contrast into those trees that we're going to have issues when we add the sky stock. So I'm going to pull the contrast back just a little bit. There we go. That looks fine. The blacks and the white point are fine. Let's go ahead and I'm going to give it a touch of clarity across the scene just a little bit and a little bit of texture. And I'm going to go ahead and give it just a little bit of a boost of vibrance and saturation. But as I look at this image, to me, it looks just a little too yellow, a little too orange from the color temperature perspective. Now, I color calibrate my monitor every 30 days, so I trust what I see here. And looking at this temperature point of 7200, I'm going to pull this down just a little bit. I'm going to take it down to like 6800 looks pretty good. And as I look at the skin tone too, I can see a little bit of yellows and oranges in play there, but that's something that we will address when we go into the color grade. We need to get everything built first and then start worrying about any type of color disparagements or matching colors and changing them and all that fliz. So at this point, I think everything looks fine for what I want to do to prepare this. I'm not going to worry about the color mixer or color grading or anything else. Those will come later on in the process potentially. But I have a good foundation to work with. So I'm going to take this into Photoshop, but I want to take it into Photoshop as a smart object because I want to go back into ACR and make some further rather extreme changes to the luminosity values to make everything brighter and then selectively bring that into the image to match the sky that we're going to put into this, essentially adding a light to the day. So to open this as a smart object, when I come down to this here where it says open at the bottom of the screen, I'm going to hold the shift key. And it's going to switch this to be open object. When I click it, it will now open this as a smart object, and spoilers, that's the sky stock that I want to use in this image today. So we are now into Photoshop with the file itself. This is a smart object. We can tell because it has the little icon in the bottom right hand corner. And instead of the layer name being background, it's the original file name itself. So I need to make a duplicate of the smart object, a second copy of it, but I don't actually want to duplicate it the traditional way by hitting Control Command and the letter J, because that will make a duplicate of it with a smart object that is linked together. So when I make changes to one of them, it will make changes to both of them at the same time. I need to make a separate copy that is a smart object. And to do that, I'm simply going to come anywhere into the layer where there's not a word or a picture and right click. And when I do, I get this menu. I'm going to come down to New Smart Object via Copy. Now it looks just like a normal copy as if I hit Control Command J. It's a little confusing. Thank you, Adobe. But this is actually a second copy of it that's completely separate from the first one. So I'm going to double click the picture of the second one, and that'll take us back into ACR with all of the changes that we had just made, as if nothing had happened, as if we never had opened it. And now I can make further extreme changes, and those are going to be pretty simple. I just want to add a lot of light to the scene. So I'm increasing the overall exposure. I'm going to increase the white points. I'm going to increase the highlights into the scene. And I'm going to push up the clarity, which is really going to help give us an HDR or high dynamic range alteration to the luminosity values into the scene, which really separates them even further. So we have really strong highlight and shadows throughout the trees and the water and so forth. Now, of course, she doesn't look good at all, and I'm ignoring her. I'm looking at that background because that's what I'm going to use to start painting in realism of a brighter, sunnier day and then throw the stock into it. So I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. That's going to render this new smart object into the Photoshops. And now I need to put a black mask onto this, or a hide all mask, and start selectively painting it in where I want it to be into the scene. So to put a black mask onto this, I'm going to come down to the bottom of the layers window. This is the mask icon. I'm going to hold the Alt or Option key and click the layer mask icon, and that will automatically make a black mask or hide all mask. Now I can paint white onto this to begin to reveal it wherever I want it to be. So to paint with this, I'm actually going to use a special brush that I made that I call my haze brush. And essentially, this is a random pattern that looks like fog and smoke, and it is programmed in the brush to rotate itself every single time I click the mouse button and stamp the brush into the scene. And so that's going to become pretty clear here in just a second of what I'm doing. But I'm going to change the flow of my brush to go to 30%, and again, painting white onto this black mask to begin to reveal that layer that we were just talking about. Now, where do I want to start bringing in all the brightness? Well, we've kind of already alluded to that. Anywhere where there's a highlight into the scene. Because if we think about it, if the day was brighter and we had that blue sky and partly cloudy sky, we want to see all the highlights be just a bit brighter, and the shadows can be exactly as they are, and it will give the illusion that there's more light into the scene. So I'm going to just simply start stamping around in the brighter areas where I see light and highlights into that background. I'm going to go ahead and change my flow to 50% for purposes of video, just to go a little bit faster here. Okay, and again, I'm avoiding the shadow areas, and I'm just simply looking at those highlights into the scene and just trying to bring those in on that layer mask. Here along the edge of the bank of this lake or pond or whatever it is, let's go across the scene and paint in some through here as well. Up top, across that area, and now along the bank. Now I'm going to zoom all the way back out. I'm going to go a couple steps back here, and I want to make my brush just a little bit bigger. So I'm using the right and left bracket keys to do that. I'm going to change the flow of the brush and go back to like 20%. And now I'm just going to start going across. Let's go 30. That's a little too slow. I'm going to start increasing and making the brush just a little bit bigger, and just giving this illusion that there is reflections of light on the water behind her. I'm going to make the brush a little bit smaller in certain key areas. There we go. And make it a little bit bigger, just manually doing this. By the way, in the brush presets, you can change the brush so that every time you click, it will not only rotate it, but it will change the overall size of the brush too. I just didn't want to do that for this brush, but that is possible to do. As we get closer to the bank, I want to make that just a touch brighter, and this water through here a little bit brighter, because natural reflections of landscape onto water on lakes and ponds and so forth, it is always a little bit brighter because it's reflecting the landscape that's nearby. Okay, so I think we've got enough good light everywhere. That feels okay. That's good. Now, the next thing I want to do is, this is a very defined edge brush to a degree. It's not a hard edge, but it's got a very defined perimeter. So in a way, this can look like foggy all over the water, and I don't want foggy, I want reflections of light. So what I want to do is, while the layer mask is selected in the layers window, I'm going to come to the properties window here and simply increase the feather of this. It was set to 0, and as I feather out the edge, it's just softening that entire edge of this mask anywhere where I painted. So it's a subtle little change, but it helps to give a sense of realism where it doesn't feel like we've been painting artificial strokes across the entire water. Now, to a degree, it may look like that to you right now, but once we add in the sky and so forth, and then you put this in front of somebody who didn't know what we did, they'll think, oh wow, what a pretty, partly cloudy day with blue sky. I had no idea that it was cloudy and nasty outside. So I'm going to undo just a couple of those right there, that edge, and then redo them. They just looked a little weird to me. Okay, so I think that's pretty good where we needed to add all of that light and so forth. So I'm ready to move on with the retouch. Now, I'm going to work destructively on this image, and I've talked about this in previous videos. Working destructively simply means I'm going to flatten everything down and then move on with something else. The danger to this is, once I go a certain point past my history states, where I take too many history states, I won't be able to go back to this point within the retouch or the edit of this image. So working destructively has its drawbacks. Most of the time when I do commercial work, I'm working non-destructively, so I'm just building different layers, and I'm keeping them all preserved. I'm not flattening anything. I save multiple versions of the document itself so I can call back to it at any point. I work destructively with my personal work like this because I hate to admit it, but I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. And if I don't force myself to move forward onto the next task in the overall edit, I will sit here and screw around with this light reflection forever and be like, there needs to be just like a little one right there. And then I'll leave for 20 minutes and make coffee and come back and be like, oh, there needs to be another one right there. And I will never get anything done. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten this. And now that undid the smart objects and just simply made this a new normal rasterized layer, it's locked the layer. It is now called background, and we're ready to move on to the retouch, doing frequency separation, dodging and burning, and enhancing the eyes. So I'm going to run the action for my Retouch 3.0 action to populate all those different layers. Now, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Take a look at the card above and it will take you to the video where you can actually download this action for free. And in that video, it will show you how to use it. I'm not going to go through a great in-depth explanation of what frequency separation is in this video today, but if you're new to frequency separation and don't know how to use this technique for retouching, then look at that card above. It will take you to the retouching series and you'll be able to not only download the action for free, you'll learn everything you need to know about frequency separation. So coming up to filter, noise, median, let's pick 7, let's go 6. 6 is fine. Hit OK. And then hit play on the action again to continue forward. Again, this is going to populate all the layers we need for frequency separation, all the layers for dodging and burning, and the layers for enhancing the eyes. For dodging and burning, I like to use the curves adjustment method. I don't like to use the solid gray layer painting white and black onto it, and that's simply because I can control the curve and add more light and shadow into the scene if needs be, instead of having to unpaint what I painted. So let's start with the detail layer, S for the clone stamp tool, and we're simply going to remove any blemishes that we see or any stray hairs. Now, when I use the clone stamp tool, I always recommend that you stay in the same zone of whatever you're trying to clone out, which means that ultimately the texture that I'm copying from one place to another, I want to use texture that is a source texture that is nearby to these strands of hairs or any of the blemishes. I don't want to grab texture, for instance, from her forehead and bring it down to her cheek. Why? Because those are at different focal lengths. They can be different colors. There's all kinds of disparities that can happen there that can essentially introduce a blemish to something you were trying to remove in the first place. So I want to try to stay in the same zone as I can and stay, generally close to the thing that you're trying to take out, and that will keep you safe as far as what you're borrowing as a source material for texture and what you're trying to get rid of and remove. Okay, I'm looking for just, again, these little flyaways. It looks like it was pretty windy that day, and that makes sense. They're near a body of water, so wind is always moving about, but it was cloudy, so clearly there was some weather happening nearby. So let's get rid of these little strands up through here. Let's get rid of the strands across that we see across her eyebrow. And one of the things too that I want to kind of offer out as a small little tip here is that your eyes get biased as you work on something like this. So as you're continuing to get rid of details and so forth, especially if you tend to lean toward the perfectionist, you can start to look at this and go, oh no, that doesn't look right. That doesn't look right. And you micro focus on every little thing. It's a good idea to just do the work, let your eyes rest for a little bit, and then come back and reassess what you've done, because you know what you've changed. And you'll see that constantly as you work. Sometimes that's not a bad thing. Sometimes it can be a horrible thing and can stall progress on a retouch. So just be cognizant of how you function when you're editing and know that you see everything you've done. Sometimes it's worthwhile to just walk away for a little bit, come back and let your eyes reset so that you can see new things that need to be changed, and or just come to accept the changes you've already made to the image itself. I'm going to zoom in to get rid of the detail of this hair that went across her mouth and her teeth. And I need to get rid of the detail first, especially for a strand of hair, because it's going to have a luminosity value in that detail that's going to stand out. I simply can't just paint a new color in and sample colors of the teeth and the mouth and whatever else to get rid of that hair. I have to get rid of the detail first, and then I can go in and paint if needs be. But we may be able to get away without having to paint too much into her mouth in there. We get rid of just a little bit of these highlights through here. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to hit Controller Command and the number 0 to zoom all the way back out. Now, I do that often when I'm working, Controller Command and the number 0 to zoom all the way back out, for two reasons. One, I'm trying to reset my eyes because I'm so zoomed in and focused, you know, in a small section of the image. And then I zoom all the way back out to kind of reset and take a breath, but also to remind myself, am I making like too many little minuscule changes in a part of the image that really isn't necessary and nobody's going to see that? And it's a good thing for me to do. It doesn't necessarily have to be a good thing for you to do, but I do that because when I am zoomed in like this, I can spend more time retouching details that aren't really necessary to go ahead and get rid of based upon the overall view of the image, like I'm doing right now. So Control or Command and the number 0, and I remind myself, I think we're pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the black and white adjustment layer, come to the color layer itself. I'm going to use the mixer brush to start mixing in colors and just kind of smoothing out the transitions between all of these colors and making everything just a little bit softer. This one step gives the illusion that the skin is softer because we're just smoothing out all the little disparagements of colors that are always naturally found in skin, especially skin that looks like she's a little bit cold because of the wind and so forth, and that can just increase blood flow and make just little variations of color into the skin, and we just need to address some of that and kind of tone all of that down. So again, this is a very gentle, quick step. It doesn't have to be like something you go through and very carefully agonize every little bit and piece of it. It's just something that's meant to smooth everything out. Control or Command the number 0 to zoom all the way back out. I think that looks pretty fine. All right, now I'm going to come to this first blank layer here, and I'm going to go to the basic traditional brush, and I'm going to change my flow to 1% by hitting Shift, 0, and 1 all at the same time. With the basic brush active, I'm going to hit Alter Option, which will defer to the eyedropper tool so I can sample some color from that bright part on her cheek. And I'm simply just going to paint in at 1% flow. You'll be surprised how quickly 1% flow can build up. And I'm just trying to smooth out some of these shadows. I just want to give them just a little, not down there in the hair. I want to give just a little bit of a lift to the shadows. Not much. The shadows need to be there. They help imply the sculpt of the light. I'm just trying to soften everything to make it give that general feathered, airy, bright kind of feeling, and I think all of that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and move into dodging and burning. And I'm going to come to the burn first. This is where I typically like to work. I start with the burn, changing the flow of my brush to 10%. I'm going to be painting white onto this layer mask to begin to reveal the burn and making things darker. Now, I do dodging and burning from a global perspective. I do not do local dodge and burn. Local dodge and burn is for skin retouching, and it is monotonous and takes forever, and I just don't have the patience for that. So I'm just accentuating some of the shadows that are naturally there. Dodging and burning to me is meant to help create a sense of three-dimensionality into the image by artificially adding highlight and shadow to the entire scene. So I'm just going to areas where like the hair meets the skull and just adding in just a touch of shadow. I'm going to darken the eyebrows a little bit. Let's go to the eyelashes themselves and just that area with mascara and so forth, we can darken that up. And again, I use this from a sculpting perspective for dodging, for creating three-dimensionality, but I also try to use dodging and burning, specifically burning, like an illustrator would or a cartoonist when they're doing the line drawing. So that's where I look at the nose and I'm like, okay, I can add just a little bit of a dark line right here around the nostril. I don't want to go too much, but that little dark line helps the parts of her face, the three-dimensional parts of her anatomy, just stand out, and so that we can see it a little bit more. And again, like a cartoonist, it just helps us to see some of those levels and changes, and that becomes interesting to look at as we look at the image across the board. So let's go down into the clothing now. I'm going to change the flow of my brush to 20%. When I dodge and burn an inanimate object like clothing, I typically go just a little bit more heavy with it, so then I can add in just a touch more shadow and highlight, and again play into some of the three-dimensional strength that we see into this image. And I'm going to do the same thing down on her hand. I'm going to go back to a flow of 10%, that illustrative kind of feel. I'm just simply accentuating the line between the fingers, and then this area here, there isn't a really strong shadow, but like an illustrator, I'm just adding a little bit of that black line to that edge, and it's a minor little thing, but it helps the image across the board just stand out just a little bit. Some of these areas where we see wrinkles and so forth in the skin that are normal folds in skin, let's just go ahead and accentuate it just a touch so that everything kind of stands out. So the burn looks good. I'm going to go to the dodge. I'm going to lower the flow of my brush to 5% instead of 10%. I typically do 10% for burn and about 5% for dodge. And my goal now here with the dodge is to go back to the places where I added shadow and add a corresponding highlight. At the same time, I'm also adding dodges and just a little bit of brightness in key areas that you would typically do on the face to help part of the three-dimensionality stand out, like the top of the cheeks here, the top of the forehead, tip of the nose, tip of the chin. I don't want to go super bright with that and make it look like it's oily skin or standing out, but it's just one that we can give it just a little touch, and it's the little subtle touches in Photoshop across the board that makes great artwork. As I say, often subtlety is key inside of Photoshop. So I'm adding just some more of that brightness to the clothing and areas where we added those shadows. Going down the leg and the calf here. Let's go ahead and hit the fingers just a little bit. There we go. You know what? Let's turn off the black and white adjustment layer real quick and go back to the frequency separation stack. And this is why this action populates all of the layers for frequency separation, dodging, and burning in the eyes all at the same time. Because often I will be in the dodge and burn step, or even retouching the eyes, and I will think, oh man, I need to go back to the frequency separation layers and fix that one detail that I didn't see before. So when I'm doing a retouch, I like to have all three of these techniques together at the same time so that I can just bounce back and forth between them to problem solve. What I'm thinking when I was working on the hands is I'm going to come back to this blank layer in the frequency separation stack, B for brush, and I'm going to change the flow of my brush again to 1%, and I'm going to sample the brighter part of the skin on her fingers, and then I'm just going to simply start painting just a little bit over the knuckles and areas like here at the tips of her fingers, because clearly she was a little bit cold and the skin color can change. Now it will always present in the hands too pretty quickly. There are other ways to do color balance in the skin besides what I'm doing right now. There's a wonderful third-party plugin called Infinite Unify by Pratik Nayak that is amazing to do color balancing of the skin. I have a video on my channel that does a demo of that plugin. It's a wonderful plugin. I'm not an affiliate or anything like that at all. So just if you want to have an easy tool that gives you a lot of great flexibility in doing color balance to skin and to hair, then check out Infinite Unify. You can watch the demo on my channel if you want to, or just go to their website. It's the Infinite Tools, I believe. I don't know the exact website, but you can Google it and it should be there. You know what? I'll put it in the description. I'll put it in the description in the video. So look at the description below, and there will be a link to Pratik's website so you can learn more about Infinite Tools. All right, so I'm going to come back up to the eyes and let's start working on those. So I'm on the white layer for the eyes. I'm changing the flow of my brush to 100% and painting in white into these areas that are white, painting white onto the mask in the areas where they're white in her eyes. It's just weird to say. Undoing what I did, I crossed over into the iris a little bit. There we go, and clean that up, or add some white there. She wears contacts, so I can see that little line disparagement there of the contact on her eyeball, but that's okay. It shouldn't show up from that far back out of what we're actually seeing in the image. Now, controller command number 0. I call this nuclear eyes. I've said this before in different videos that ultimately when folks are just learning digital retouching, that you can have an issue like this where you leave the whites of the eyes just too powerful and it pulls focus, and no matter what else you do to the image, this is all the audience will see. So I'm going to take the opacity of this layer and pull it down, and I usually go down to like 30-ish% and then work from there to see how it's affecting the image. So let's zoom all the way back out and do a quick before and after of the whites. Yep, it's just a gentle little boost. I think that looks pretty fine. So let's move on. Number 2 layer in this stack is the iris light boost. Now, when I paint whites on this mask at 100% flow and opacity, we're going to see her eyes leap out like a Christmas tree because Christmas trees are known to leap. So I'm going to continue painting white here to reveal as we see all those. My gosh, she has like every color of the spectrum in her peepers. Wow, kid, you've got really cool eyes. That's neat. Anyway, this is obviously too much, and this is by design. So if we look at the layer stack here, here's the curves adjustment layer that I'm painting white on to reveal it, but it has a hue saturation adjustment layer clipped to it. I'm going to click the icon of the hue saturation adjustment layer to activate the properties, and we can see the saturation has been pushed up to vampire levels of 78. It's creeping me out. Her eyes are staring at me. I'm going to reduce the saturation and bring it back down to like 40. That saturation was increased on purpose to make it easier for you to see what you're painting. Now let's zoom back out, and we need to de-vampire her. And ultimately, it isn't the saturation, it's the iris luminance that's in her eyes. Her eyes have a lot of detail into them, a lot of color, so any kind of luminosity change we're going to make to them will make them stand out even further. This is why I like using the curves adjustment method, not only for dodging and burning, but for any type of luminosity work that I have to do in an image, because I get controls like this little point that I can simply bring back down and lessen some of that luminance in her eyes. So back and forth and seeing it. Now, it's still a little too vampire-y to me for my taste, and I don't want to completely pull out the curve, but this layer has a blend if done to it already. That's what these two little squares mean. So I'm going to double click on the layer again where there's no words or no pictures. This will bring up the layer style window, and this is the blend if section. So I'm simply going to increase the blend if and let some of the natural shadows of the original layer come up and through her eyes. That's going to take away that vampire feeling just a touch and give us that little boost that we need to her eyes, but not too much more than that. We can take that point back up if we want to, but the further we go up, the more that we might just be introducing vampire werewolf eyes, and we just don't need that. So at this point, I think it looks fine. I'm not going to worry about the iris color boost. Again, her eyes are pretty powerful as they are, and the iris ring, the limbal ring around her iris, is pretty strong as it is already, so I don't think we need to worry about that. So the last thing that I want to do before we move on with this is I'm going to lessen some of the yellow that we see in her teeth just a little bit. Now, let me be very careful with this and what I say, so please hear me. This is not me making a statement that her teeth are yellow or bad or anything like that at all, but that flash that's coming in is illuminating her teeth, and it could, between her skin, the pink and the green. Keep in mind that the auto white balance is probably going crazy right now because green, blue, and pink, red, green, and blue, it's having a heck of a time probably trying to balance all these colors, especially the tints between green and blue, tint, T-I-N-T, the tint between green and magenta, which is a part of the color profile of this image. So that can throw off things like teeth. It can throw off skin tones and so forth. And arguably that's happening here just a little bit. So I would challenge you, Josie, if you're watching this, or anybody, when you're working with a strobe on a cloudy day like this, the strobe is going to have a certain kind of color temperature to it. The sky and everything else is going to have a different color temperature to it. It's vitally important that you shoot a white balance card. Get a white piece of paper, just a normal white piece of paper, no lines on it. Don't get a cream color piece of paper, try to get white. You can also buy a gray card, an actual official 50% gray card, and take a picture of that with the flash in this lighting environment. That will give you the opportunity to do an auto white balance, and that's going to adjust luminosity values and color values so that we don't have any issues. Now there is a simple fix to this, and it's very easy. All we're going to do, I'm just trying to figure out where to put it in the layer stack. I'm going to put it here right above the detail layer. I'm just going to make a hue saturation adjustment layer. There's many different ways to retouch teeth, some with more stronger, more better, I don't know, more reliable results than others, but this one should be a simple fix. So all I'm going to do is come to the hue saturation adjustment layer properties here. It's on the master slider. I'm going to come down to yellow and just desaturate the color yellow. And as you can see, it's coming away from her skin too. So this is what I was saying. Her teeth are fine. It's just an auto white balance issue. And this isn't a reflection on Josie either. This is just a simple problem of photographing on cloudy days with flashes. It just happens. So I'm removing the saturation of yellow just a touch, and I'm going to increase the lightness of yellow just a touch. I don't want to take the saturation completely out because then it's going to actually make her teeth look weird. So I'm just going to pull the yellow down just a little bit, and then invert this mask that comes with the hue saturation adjustment layer. So while the layer mask is selected, I'm just going to hit Control Command and the letter I for invert. That will make it a black mask so that I can paint white on it to reveal it. Looks like she's got a strand of hair over her teeth too that we should take care of. But I'm not going to. I'm just going to move on because nobody's going to see it. Blah, 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 blah. So I'm painting white at 100% flow and opacity and just simply fading some of that yellow that's due to the auto white balance issues that we see in the image. I want to make sure that I get it from everywhere so it doesn't look like we're leaving any yellow along the perimeter edge, but I don't want to go up into the gums because the gums and lips have yellow and orange in them as well as red. And so more yellow and orange, I would say, than red. So we don't want to take it away from that. It will make her skin or her gums look unhealthy. Control Command, the number 0. See, it looks weird already. So like we need to bring some of it back just a little bit. So I'm going to go to the Properties tab, back to yellow, and increase the saturation just a little bit, and increase that lightness just a little bit to make everything a little bit lighter. Let's go ahead and pull that saturation back to normal just a touch. There we go. So before, after, subtle little change, but it's helping to balance out those yellows. Now, when we get to the point where we're going to do some color grade work, I do want to take a look at the overall saturation of yellow in her skin and the oranges and try to balance that out just a touch by hand using Adobe Camera Raw rather than using something like Infinite Unify. Just for the folks who are watching this that only have Photoshop and can't invest right now in something like Infinite Unify, I want to show you a way to fix that. But that's pretty good from the retouch perspective. Again, frequency separation, dodging and burning, enhancing the eyes, removing a little bit of that auto white balance issue of yellow into the skin. We did the 2 different smart objects, preparing the background and getting ready. It is now time for the fun, which is the compositing, and arguably going to be the harder part of this entire video. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten because I work destructively, and it's done. It's flattened. All right, so what I want to do, I want to take an assessment here because, again, I'm going to move the tree line down. I'm going to replace the sky. And I want to look at the thirds real quick. Okay, so she's pretty spot on. I don't want to increase the overall size of this image because then her foot is going to cut off at the edge. But I may have to move her because I want to move her head up just a little bit more to fill a little bit more of the center third. Yeah, by like 2 inches. Okay, so this is helping me make decisions. This is the first time I'm editing this image, so it's helping me make decisions of what I want to do. So I'm hitting W for the quick selection tool. And when I do, I get 2 options up here, select subject and select a mask. Now, I've talked about in previous videos that I used to not like select subject because this is Adobe Sensei, the AI of Adobe that is Skynet that's going to attempt to figure out what the subject is in the image and make a selection around it. In the past, it used to suck. It's now really, really good. It's worthy of the name Skynet. Terminator is going to show up to your door in a second now. So I'm going to click select subject and it should make a relatively good selection of her. It made a really good selection of her. It's so creepy to me. AI just creeps me out. I'm just waiting for John Connor to come running. Anyway, so it's missing a few pieces like this little part of the sweater right there. So I'm using the actual quick selection tool and adding that in using my Wacom Intuos Pro tablet pen. I want to also make a selection of the grass area, but I don't need the lake. So I'm going to make sure I'm just circling this in a little bit, and I'm not going to worry about all the little individual blades of grass because once we're ready, we can just feather that out on the mask itself and recover all of that. Because keep in mind, my intention is to take this body of water and push it down. But I'm not going to push it down to where the trees meet the grass. There will still be water. So I can just fade out the edge of the mask once we're done here in a moment and recover all those little blades of grass and make it believable. But I do want a full selection of her and a good one. So I'm going to zoom in and just make sure that it's got as much of the hair and everything else as possible. Now, one of the things that we are definitely going to do is I'm going to show you how I extract hair and how I work with hair in composites, and ultimately how I leave like 80% of the hair, the original hair behind, the little flyaways and strands and stuff. I leave those behind and I paint in new ones. But I want to make sure that I get a good enough selection because I think I'm going to have to move her up. Let's find out. So The next step, once we made the selection, is to then come into the select and mask dialog. By clicking this button, it takes us into a new dialog where we have a new set of controls where we can refine the edge of our selection and do a few other things. We can also make further changes to the selection itself. So the first thing I want to do is the Refine Edge Brush tool. It's in the additive mode. Essentially what this is going to do, it's not going to make an entirely new selection like the quick selection tool did. All it's meant to do is just refine the actual selection you made. So I'm painting in around those strands of hair, and it's going to start looking for the colors and the details of the original image that we said we don't want, and see if it's in the selection and then try to remove it. Now I'm doing it in the hair because I want to make sure I use the computer to do as much thinking for me as possible. And this has gotten a lot better over time, but let me take a step back and make a soapbox statement here about AI technology. And I've said this in a few different videos on the channel. AI is constantly improving, and I think AI is a wonderful thing. But AI is never going to be a one-click solution for challenges like this, of extracting somebody from an image like this. And no matter what new programs come out, they are going to show you marketing images and video where they use cheap, easy images, where somebody's hair is a pretty even tone of color against a pretty easy background, and it'll look at this, 1-2 click and it's done, right? AI does a lot of good stuff really quickly, and I've been working in Photoshop for 20 years. The AI of Photoshop in Select and Mask has greatly improved over the past 3 or 4 years from what it used to be. So it is making improvements, but you are still going to have to use your human eyes and your human brain to do certain things in Photoshop to complete the look and the effect of what you're going for. This is why I say you have to learn why things work in Photoshop, why you have to learn multiple ways of doing one thing or solving one problem, because every image is different. The more that you expand your knowledge in Photoshop, and you can. My channel on YouTube, there's plenty of channels on YouTube and other sources of education that teach things like this. The more that you can complete the journey of your artwork yourself, the better you're going to be as an artist, the better your business is going to be. So, soapbox rant done. I'm going to zoom in and just make sure that there's nothing else too egregious. This is part of what I was talking about, because as we look at this, a lot of haloing is taking place as Adobe Sensei tries to figure out what it needs to keep and what needs to go away. So these brown pixels are the strands of hair. These darker greenish bluish ones is the trees in the background. It doesn't know how to distinguish between those at this fine, minute level, at this stage of development of Adobe Sensei. And we have controls on this side over here in the Select and Mask dialog that lets us refine things. The key element here is to make sure that this button, Smart Radius, is checked, and that you have the radius for edge detection slid up between anywhere from like 8 to 12 to 14 pixels. I generally start at 8, and if I need to go further, I will. This lets Adobe Sensei just really further refine the entire edge, really thinking about the pixels and so forth, and gives you a more realistic looking edge than if you did not check this and had the radius set to 0. So ultimately, the best way to get the extraction is to do it by hand with the layer mask. So here at the bottom for the output, it's going to output to a new layer with a layer mask once I hit OK. Then when we go back into Photoshop, we have our second layer with our layer mask, and she's been extracted. So I'm going to run a quick little action called Mask Cleanup that populates these 3 different layers into the layer stack. This one filled with green, and the opacity has been set to 58% so that we can see back and through to the original background layer. This is similar to what the Select and Mask dialog was just doing, so that when I start painting on the mask by hand to recover everything, it's going to give me that view as we saw in Select and Mask. Now, one of the first things I do when I start cleaning up a layer mask is I'm going to actually hold Alt-Option and click the layer mask itself. And it's going to give me a true view of the layer mask. And I do this for one very important reason. For little lines like this, this black section of paint is missing pixels from the selection that I actually want around her knee. So as the quick selection was making its choice, and then I added the quick selection tool and started selecting the grass, this is a thin little pixel section that will be missing if I don't paint white right now on the mask at 100% flow and opacity. So I always do this view of the mask really quickly by holding Alt or Option and clicking the layer mask, just to see if there's any little black lines anywhere inside the white that's showing me that pixels are missing. So returning back to the normal view of it, I'm simply going to zoom around the edge of the image and look for any big issues or areas that need to be painted and brought back in. All of this hair up here, I don't care about that. Let it go, because you're never going to be able to make a selection around it. And if you try to hand paint it in with this layer mask, you've got to get down to the pixel level. And we just saw that the moment you go 1 pixel outside, you're going to start introducing the background itself that you don't want. You're going to introduce your own haloing. So it's better for it to just go away. Now, little areas like this, where this little bit of gray is the water behind her and we can see the strands of hair, I'm not going to paint that out either right now at this stage. It is far infinitely easier to use the clone stamp tool here and just stamp it in and cover up that section. So I'm going to go over all of this at greater detail with more examples in the retouching series very soon in the next few days on the channel, because I'm beginning that now. We left off with hair and I just needed those hair brushes and it was hard to get because of COVID. So again, looking around the entire perimeter edge, everything looks pretty fine. I want to make sure, like here, the sweater, there's little sections of the sweater we can bring back in. So I'm just going to paint white right at the edge and bring that back in. But ultimately, it's not too worrisome. And the selection is relatively fine. We have a layer mask we can clean up. If we zoom in again and take that interior look, all of this, well, I call schmutz, and inside all of these little specks of black paint, this is reflections of pixels that are missing. I don't want to just, in this view, just start painting whites like that, because that could be an area where we need there to be some of that fringing. Now, in this case, we can see, no, that was actual strands of hair that are missing. So we could go through the entire perimeter like I'm doing right now and just paint on the inside to make sure that nothing is missing. But is it worth it for an image this zoomed back out? No, it isn't. Nobody's going to see it. It should be okay. So we have a decent selection around our kid and our subject. Now let's start playing Frankenstein with this whole thing and see what we can put together to change the weather on this day. So I'm going to unlock the background layer. Now I have to think, and I can't walk and chew gum at the same time, so I got to think. How do I want to do this? I want to move her up. Let me get the thirds back in here. Yeah, I want to move her up to about there, and I want to move the horizon down to about there. Okay. It's going to make the lake really short. And the lake arguably is a scenic part of this. So maybe I shouldn't move her up. Maybe I should just go ahead and keep her where she was. And put this. Yeah, I do want to bring this down to about there. But we still have the same amount of gap almost in the water. So if I push her back up to there, I can bring the background up to about there. And again, it's a lot of grass to look at and so forth, but I like the framing of where she's at. So I'm having a hard time making a decision here because I don't want to see this much grass in the scene. But I like her head being more in this top third, but we're only talking about an inch or two. So let's compromise and push it down as much as we can, returning it back to the normal frame that we can, and about there. There. Yeah. And just to keep in mind, this is the original image. So this tree line was right, let's say, at her ear. And now once we clone out the version of her behind her, it'll be, that tree line is going to be at her neck and at her collarbone. I would prefer that it be like that, but then the lake is really, really gone. And we could clone away some more of the edge here of the grass that she's standing on, but then we're going to have to paint in real strands of grass and so forth. And I just don't think that's worth it. So we're going to have to compromise here just a touch. So I think about there is fine. So let's take a look at this and see what we need to do. So our top layer is the new real layer. I'm going to go ahead and remove these little guidelines that are in there. So the new real layer, that's where we need to be. So we can see just a little bit of her knee poking out down here. And because the original edge of the frame is right at the edge of the glass, we have some fall off distortion where things are just a little bit out of focus. So we go from in focus up here to out of focus to in focus again. So we're going to have to solve that problem by just blurring out the background just a little bit, or that new section of grass. And we'll do that in a more easy way here. But let's go ahead and address this phantom second version of her in the background. So I'm on this bottom layer here. I'm going to hit S for the clone stamp tool. I'm at 100% flow and opacity. I'm going to make this my source right here at this water line. And let's do it right here in this little shadow so that I'm trying to move away so I don't introduce a recognizable pattern immediately the next step over. So I'm going to come here and then come over and match that live view and simply paint across. Now there's light problems and all kinds of stuff we're introducing here by painting at a pure 100% flow and opacity. That's okay. We just got to get it in. Now we'll get these random little patterns taken care of the trees. And then down through here and get close to that water line. Now I'm going to change the flow of my brush of my clone stamp tool to 10% and then come right here to this edge and just start gently painting that in because we have that little darker tone of water right through there. And since this is a very shallow depth of field behind her, and I mean she shot wide open to a degree, we don't have to worry about matching details too much because it is just falling off. It's got that faded focus point. Don't think we have to worry about it over here, but let's go ahead and, yeah, we do. So there's some tree issues right there at the edge of her hair. So let's go ahead and just bring that in. Then I'm going to change my flow again to 10% and just try to give a little bit of variety to those colors through there. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, extraction of the hair. We have all of this haloing. This is what I was talking about when we were in the select and mask dialog. So this is something we're going to have to address and remove because this just doesn't look real. There's several different ways to try to combat this. And this is why I said just a moment ago, and I always say that you have to develop a bag of tricks in Photoshop to solve one problem. So this is haloing in the hair, and we need to solve this one problem, and there's a few different ways we can explore doing it. So S for the clone stamp tool though, and let's get rid of those little strands right there that we see. All of this frizz up here, especially this haloing right through here, this isn't worth it. This is original strands of hair that just looks bad. So this is on the new layer, the top one up top, but then we can also see that hair behind from the original image. So I'm going to turn off the new layer for a second and simply clone in sky stock. Now this is bad and it doesn't look good, but I'm only doing this so that Photoshop will be helped out when I use the quick selection tool here in a minute to make a selection of the sky, and all of this will go away. I don't need it to be in the image. As a matter of fact, we can stop right there because I'm pretty sure Photoshop won't pick it up. So now on this layer mask that we just made, I'm going to hit B for brush, change my flow to 100%, and I'm going to rotate it. So I'm hitting the letter R. No matter what tool you're on, if you hit the letter R, it lets you rotate the screen. I paint better left to right. I talk about this in all the videos. And so that I can ultimately paint the right way that I need to. And then when I'm done, I can just reorient the image by hitting the escape key. So I'm going to paint black onto this layer mask to start taking away all this fringing that we see. We just don't need it. And with the haloing that I know is going to be there in the sky, I'm just going to remove it all. And again, this was Adobe Sensei finding all those little strands of hair. We did the Refine Edge Brush tool, and it did its job. It just introduces haloing to a point that just looks gross and is ultimately going to cause more problems than it serves to fix. I'm making the edge just a little more tight, a little stronger. And then coming onto this side and seeing if we've got the same problems. We do. And again, retouching hair and making it realistic can be a long consuming process, but it's a simple process. It just takes a little bit of time on how real you want to go. Now for an image, again, where she's pretty far away, we don't necessarily need to come in and match all the hairs that are on the surface and make sure they actually flow out to the sides and so forth, because they won't be that noticeable. Even if it was printed as a 16 by 20, it won't be that noticeable. But if this was a beauty close-up shot of the kid and her face, then yeah, we're going to have to match hair strands, and I'll talk about that here in just a moment, what I mean when I say match hair strands on the surface. So We have a good selection of her. We know what's going on with this. Now let's go ahead and come to the original layer here, this base layer. I'm going to hit W for the quick selection tool. I'm going to go ahead and select the sky. I'm just making a quick little gesture. Now it's stopped, and that little circular area is actually her head from the original image. And so I'm going to go ahead and just start selecting it down and then unselecting it by holding the Alt Option key. The Alt Option key, which is taking the quick selection tool into the reductive mode. So it's taking away from the selection we just added. Up here, quick selection, this by default is what it should be on. This is the additive mode. This is the reductive mode. I'm in additive mode all the time, so I'm adding to my selection every time I touch my pen to the tablet, and then I hold Alt Option to automatically go into reductive mode to take away from the selection. Just saves you a little bit of time instead of having to go all the way up there. Now, this is an active selection of just the sky. Anything inside the marching ants is your selection at this point. I need to invert it so that I can protect everything else and get rid of the sky. So I'm going to hit Control, Shift, and the letter I for invert, and that inverted the entire selection. Now I'm going to take this into Select and Mask, just as we did before, so that we can see everything that's left. Now we have this hard edge. This is where the Refine Edge Brush tool is going to come into play very handily. Anyway, so I'm going to just click one time and go through the perimeter like this. And it's going to make the changes as it goes. But keep in mind, this is Adobe Sensei doing a lot under the hood. And depending upon the speed of your computer, the power of your GPU and your CPU, it can take a little bit of time. So just be careful with it. I'm going across and letting it refine this edge and giving me a more realistic pattern to those trees. And I think that looks slick. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now we have our new background layer with a layer mask. And then we have our initial top layer with her selected. I know this can all seem a little bit confusing, but it'll make sense here in just a moment. So on this layer mask, we can see anything in black is being hidden from the original layer, anything in white is being revealed. We have this little white bar at the top, and that's because I shifted the original background layer down. So when I just did that selection and hit Control, Shift, and I, it made a selection up here too. So all I need to do is hit B for brush, and I need to paint black up here to make sure that nothing like a white bar just doesn't show up randomly in the image as we're working and going forward. So Alt Option to go back to the normal view. Now, let's bring the sky stock in. We've done all this work. Let's bring the sky stock in. So I'm going to come to this blue sky stock, and let's talk about why I chose this piece. This is a blue sky day with partly cloudy. There is no easily identifiable light source. We don't know where the sun is in this day, but it's a bright day. So the clouds have natural highlights and shadows at the base, but we don't see strong super highlights like the sun is right over here, just off frame. This is key because this image was a cloudy day. If we were to use a piece of sky stock where there's bright shafts of sunlight coming into the scene, we're going to have to match that light output everywhere on these trees, on the water, on her, everywhere. It's going to be a mess and take entirely too long. But we can introduce this piece and save ourselves the trouble and time of making it realistic. And since it's a blue sky and it's pretty, we're adding to the warmth and beauty of this day that she probably wanted for her session instead of the cloudy day. So one, that's why I chose this. But number two, that's the first reason why I chose it. But number two, these little clouds at the base through here, these show us depth and dimension. As a human being, we understand these clouds down here are far away. These clouds over here are closer to us. So as this image, think about it arcing as an orb, these clouds that are here are closest to camera. These clouds out here are way in the distance. We as humans understand that. I want this piece of stock because when I bring it in, I want the horizon line and bring it down on the layer stack to the appropriate place. I don't want it like this. And often I will see this in composites when people add sky stock into an image. This doesn't look real because these clouds are way too close. We need to show distance. That's why I want all that little scuttle cloud in the distance in the background there. So I'm going to kind of position this to be where I want it to be. Let's go ahead and flip it horizontally. Ooh, yeah, I like that better. I like that a lot better. Yeah. And since there's no obvious direction of light in this, we can flip it however we wish. So I think that's fine. Now, the next thing that we need to do to add some realism to this is that clearly the background of the trees and the lake, very out of focus because of that shallow depth of field. The cloud sky stock is not. So we need to blur it. So I'm going to come up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, 6.8. Let's go to 8. Let's look at these clouds over here. Yeah, that looks fine. I think that's good. Here's another quick tip from a compositing perspective. Excuse me 1 second. Dust. So in the original image, there's a lot of noise in the image. This is not a bad thing. It's not like Josie's camera is horrible or whatever else. There's always noise in images. But this sky stock noise has been removed. What did I... Oh, we're on the sky stock. I got you. So as we can see, we see a lot of noise through here, but not in the clouds. We need to add some to it. Now, you can go up to Filter, Noise, and add noise, but I don't like adding noise that way because it has a very defined pattern to it that choosing monochromatic or whatever, it kind of helps, but not to the realism that I'm looking for. We need to add grain to this. So to add grain to the sky stock, we need to go into Adobe Camera Raw as a filter. So I'm going to hit Control Shift and A or Command Shift and A on a Mac, and that will take us into ACR as a filter, and then we can come down to the Effects tab here and use this first option. Now the problem is with this, we can't see the trees at the same time to try to match the grain, so we just kind of have to eyeball it. So as we increase the grain, we can see it coming into play in the sky. Here's where it was, here's where it is. Now we know that Josie's noise in her picture does not look like this, so let's go ahead and pull this down. I'm going to err on the side of it being a little stronger than I think it needs to be. Yeah, that looks pretty good. The pattern is not quite the same. That's a little too much. So I'm going to hit Control or Command and the letter Z to go one step back in my history, then Control Shift and A. And I can make this a smart object, make the sky stock a smart object, and then just double click it and go back and forth because it would make a smart filter with the grain. But again, the time it takes to do that, as well as just going one step back in your history. We were somewhere in the 20s. I think it's relatively same amount of time committed. Okay, I think that's good enough. And it adds just one little further step of realism. So before we start painting in here, you know what, let's do that and then I want to talk about realism. I want to stay on that thread. Stay on the thread. Focus, David. Stay on target. Stay on target. Loosen up. Star Wars, anybody? Okay. So realism. I talk about the fundamentals all the time. Color, luminosity, and detail. Those three elements are so key to everything you do in Photoshop, whether you're trying to figure out what to do or what your next step is or how to make realistic composites, all those things in between. Looking at this, the next thing that I want to look at, we just addressed detail by blurring the sky so that it matches the blurry out of focus background. Now we need to look at luminosity and color and make sure that they match to the image. Remember way back at the beginning of this in ACR, I said that I was trying to make this foundation neutral, so that I can match everything together. That's what I'm trying to do right now. But I need to know what needs to be matched first. So I'm going to come to the very top of the layer stack and come down to the adjustment window here. And I want to make a threshold adjustment layer. This is a wonderful helper to figure out where light and shadow is coming into the scene at the very beginning of it. So let me explain. When it's turned on, it turns the image black and white to a degree because it's looking at the thresholds of light. If we look at the properties here for the threshold adjustment layer, we can see this is the histogram, and we can see that it started us right in the middle at 128. Now there are three numbers that represent light values in Photoshop. There's 0, 128, and 255. So at 128, we're in the midtones. If I take this all the way to 255, this is technically 255 is for light. So that's how you would be at light. That's the maximum numerical value of light in Photoshop is 255. But since it looks black, it's special to the threshold adjustment layer because what it's doing is showing us the opportunity of where light comes into the scene at the very beginning, where the strongest light source is and where it starts. Again, if we look at this data here, this little data as it comes up, this is the histogram. So as I start taking this triangle back to the left, anywhere where we start to see white into the scene is the strongest points of light into this picture, including the sky behind, the sky stock that we just put into it. So as I continue to take it forward, we can see the water, those are the clouds. So the clouds are getting light before the water does. That's a problem. So the sky is brighter than the water is. We need that to match more closely, more realism there. Her face and so forth, I'm going to kind of ignore that because she was artificially lit. So let's take this all the way to the left. Now, as we start to slide it back to the right, anything we start to see in black is where the first shadows come into play, where we see the darkest point in the image. So her hair, where her leg is meeting the grass, but then in those trees, a lot of shadow before we start to see there. So we're almost back to the midpoint before we start to see tonal shadows in the sky, and those trees are practically fully in shadow. So the luminosity values between the sky stock and the trees are not matching. From a contrast perspective, from a luminosity perspective, from tone, we need to work with that and address it. So I'm going to turn off that threshold adjustment layer, and I'm going to, I don't think I want to take the shadows or contrast out of the trees and the water any further to try to match it. Because keep in mind, they're darker than the sky. So let's add contrast to the sky and work with that and see if we can match it down to those trees. So I'm going to use a brightness contrast adjustment layer. No. What do I want to do here? Hold on, I have to think. And again, I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. I'm going to clip it. No, because it's going to clip it to her. I need to clip it to this. So I'm going to put this brightness and contrast adjustment layer in the layer stack right above the original background layer that has the trees and the water. This selection of her is her separately, but the grass. And we'll work with the grass in a minute if we need to, but I don't think we'll have to. So I want to clip this brightness contrast to it so that it's only going to affect that layer of trees and water. It will not affect the sky stock itself. And now I'm going to start increasing the overall contrast. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't want to do that. I want to do it to the sky. Sometimes when you get into composites, there's so many moving parts, and then I have to talk to you about it. That's the problem. I can't just flow through my brain and do the work. Anyway, I'm going to clip it to the sky stock and increase the contrast into the sky. There we go. That's starting to look a little bit better. Now let's turn that threshold adjustment layer back on and come up here to the properties of it and start bringing this over. Trees. The sky's coming in just a little bit sooner, but not enough. And we may not be able to get them fully matched. That's okay, but I want to try to get it as close as I can. So let's go ahead and increase the contrast just a touch more on that sky. You know what? No, I'm going to delete this brightness and contrast layer, and I'm going to take the sky stock into Adobe Camera Raw as a filter, because we need to do more than just work with the contrast. I'm going to come to the basic tab, increase the contrast just a little bit, increase the black point in the image. That's going to help a lot. And I'm going to pull the shadows in just a touch more, pull the whites down just a little bit, and maybe push the highlights up just a little bit. We'll give it some more clarity, and then hit OK. And now let's look at that threshold and see. So pull it in. Sky's coming in even sooner now. We're at 76. We were at like 90 here before we started seeing sky. And originally we were almost the midpoint before we saw it. So it is getting better. We could push it a little bit more, but I don't think I want to. I think it's okay right there. But something else is happening now because we're addressing the luminosity values and trying to match the sky to the trees and the water. The third fundamental is coming into play because as we add tone to that sky, the colors are becoming more saturated. But the saturation of colors in the tree and the water are not. They look flat comparatively. So we need to adjust that as well. So I'm going to come to this background layer. I'm going to hit Control Shift and A and take it into Adobe Camera Raw as a filter. I'm going to increase the vibrance just a touch and the saturation overall. I'm going to pull out the shadows just a little bit more to try to further match those tonal differences. Increase the white point slider and the highlights to make the sections of the trees and the water stand out just a little bit more. Then I'm going to come down to the color mixer. And this is where I can target some of the specific colors rather than just globally increasing all the saturation. I can come to the green slider and increase the green's saturation. These trees and grass, by the way, that's more of a yellow than an actual green. Very rarely is grass fully green in color. So I'm increasing the saturation of green and that luminescence of it as well. Let's go ahead and come to the blues, increase the saturation of the blue. We can see it showing up in the water a little bit, but then more in her jeans than anything, and increasing those luminance values there as well. We'll go to cyan and increase those, but there isn't that much in there. Okay, good. Now I'm going to hit OK. And it's making everything in color be a little more saturated, a little bit brighter, joining with the sky. We need to do the same thing for this top layer here so that the grass will match it, but we'll do that in just a minute, because when we do, it's really going to affect her and her skin tone. Because keep in mind, again, the grass has yellow in it, and we've already talked about how with the auto white balance issues, her skin has more yellow in it than I think it should. So let's continue to repair a few things and start painting in that hair. How about we do that? And then we'll fix and unify things a little bit more. So I'm going to come to this layer mask. I want to smooth out this edge again, as we were talking about earlier. So I'm doing B for brush. I'm going to paint white. I'm just going to do it at a flow of like 10%. I'm going to bring back the original selection here. There we go. And we're getting all those original blades of grass back. Now, when we brighten up this grass, it's also going to brighten up that water a little bit to match that background water as well. So we just made everything seem a little foggy and distorted, but we'll increase that here in just a minute when we take that into the Adobe Camera Raw. So what I want to do now is I'm going to make a new blank layer in between this background layer and the picture of her, the top layer where we have her selected. This is where I'm going to do most of my hair painting with my hair brushes. I may actually put a layer above her at the top of the layer stack and do some further painting. But let's start here and see how far we can go. So I'm gonna hit B for brush and come down to my new hair brushes that I've created. Now some of these I'm still playing with and testing with, but I'm going to go ahead and include them in the package of all the brushes if you choose to purchase them. Again, in the description below in this video is a link to the website. But I wanna start using these, which are the newest ones that I've created, and I'm gonna grab that one. And I'm using the left and right bracket keys to make the brush bigger or smaller. So you can see it's got a pretty good shape of hair. And more importantly, it's got the little flyers coming out from it. Now, some folks hate flyers and they want the flyers all to be retouched. The flyers are the little strands of hair that come out, the single strands of hair. Those make things look real in composites. It creates believability and realism, especially in an image like this where we can see that her hair was definitely flowing about that day. So what do I do with these brushes? How do we utilize them? Well, I'm going to use my traditional mouse and stamp the brushes onto this blank layer. I'm not going to use my Wacom pen tablet for that because I would have to tap the pen onto the tablet every time I wanted to stamp the brush in, and that can start to wear down the tip of my pen really quickly. So right now, my brush is set to a flow of 10%. I'm going to go ahead and change that to be 100%. Again, using the bracket keys to make the brush bigger or smaller. I'm also going to use the arrow keys to rotate the brush head left and right. You can also hold the shift key and use left and right and do it in more even degree increments. If you use the arrow keys and it doesn't rotate your brush head, you'll have to come up to edit and down to preferences. And there's a checkbox. I think it's under workspace, maybe? No, or tools or interface. Performance, cursors. It's in one of those fields. It'll just be a checkbox that says use arrow keys to rotate brush head. So I want to start stamping in this brush, but I don't want to stamp it in like that, especially using the color black because it's not going to work. So I need to sample first some of the actual colors that are in her hair. And again, if I hold Alt or Option, that will defer the brush tool to the eyedropper tool so I can select some colors. Do I want to sample this bright color from the highlight of her hair? No, because it doesn't look real. And keep in mind, even though this brush is in the shape of hair, it's only going to fill in with one color that you choose. You'll have to do some hand painting to add a little bit further realism potentially. So I'm going to go one step back in my history. I need to sample some of the darker tones that we see right at the perimeter edge of the hair where I want to paint it in. Now, do I want to do this and paint it in? Well, if I wanted to add a whole bunch of more hair to the scene, yeah, I could do that. And then I've got a lot of work inside those stamps, adding in variances of color to make it realistic. But all I'm looking to do right now is to add in some of those little flyers so that it looks real. It looks like when we extracted her, like we never extracted her, that it was all real and done the right way. So I'm reducing the size of my brush and I'm simply moving, as you can see, 95% of it behind her where we won't see it. I just want those little tips of the hair like that to stand out. Then I'm going to rotate the brush a little bit and tap it and move it back and just start creating these little bits and pieces. I'm going to take the edge of this brush right up here and just make a new perimeter edge like that. All those soft edges that I painted in, I'm now just taking the edge of the brush out just a little bit to create a more realistic edge along the perimeter, using the colors of her hair as a guide all the way through. Let's come up to the top part here. Let's go ahead and give her a little bit more realism. So I'm going to sample some of these colors and just stamp in just a little bit of the edge and making sure that I stay as rotated on the brush as I can. If we have little flyers come out on the edge like that over down here, as I'm looking up here, that's fine, because again, we just have little flyaways. And keep in mind, this is on a separate layer by itself. So as we zoom in, we can see this hard edge right here of my brush. All I have to do is hit E for the eraser tool and just simply erase that away if needs be. And then continue back with the main brush tool, just painting things in. Okay, so let me Control minus and zoom back out. I'm going to rotate my brush a lot now. I want to get some of these little wisps of hair right at the center and just paint those up. I'm going to make my brush just a touch bigger, or smaller, excuse me, and get just little wisps across in various sections. Then I'm going to go to another brush, and let's pick this one. And I got to reduce it until we can see it on the screen. Now I'm going to rotate it just a little bit and come in here like this and sample some of this brighter tone and paint in just a few of these little strands right at that perimeter edge of her hair and right about there. Then come down to the side here, paint in some more. Got to change the colors because now we're getting away from that brighter color that we saw above the top of her head. There we go. And let's go ahead and add just a few more like that. Nah, it's too much. Let's put it in right there. And let's go back just a little bit. There we go. We can even rotate it completely the other way and just match the hair flowing up. We got that little corner edge right there. So I just want to make sure I like those little strands that we put right here. I just got to paint out, or erase, I'm sorry, down here where it made that hard edge. B for brush. Rotate the head just a little bit the other way, David. There we go. And then I'm going to rotate it back to the normal orientation that we had it before, like that. Through here. Click a couple times. Rotate, click. Add in these little fake strands of hair. Sample new color just to make sure we're on the right path. Go. Sample new color and stamp right over, because now I'm just introducing little flyers of a varying color, and do the same like this. I will often do this a bunch of different times. Sample and paint. And we're adding in just little strands of hair that are flyers that look real and flow with her hair naturally. I'm going to grab one more of these brushes. Let's go with this one and see if we can get just a little bit more, yeah, up here in this curve. I want to add some more just little flyers up here in this curve. So B for brush, rotating my brush head. There we go. And get just a few more rotations in. Oh, too dark. So sample this bright one, make the brush a little bit smaller, and just get some little strands into there. I don't like that one. Switch brushes. Let's go with one of the others up here. Let's go with, I want to try this one. And all of these were made using real human hair, which sounds evil and mischievous. Real human hair. Can't tell you how I made it, because then my answer might serve to incriminate me on a court of law. Just playing. Anyway, I'm gonna rotate the screen just a little bit more. I just want to get a few more little wispy flyers like that out of nowhere. And again, over there. Okay. I think we could add a few more. So let's go back to, and this is one where I could do this all day. It drives me batty sometimes because I like adding hair like this. I just feel like it's never done, and you just want to add more and more and more, and it's like, oh my gosh, I've been adding hair for 20 minutes. Okay, good. And just like we could even, you know, yes, she's got a, no, that doesn't look good. We just need to add these little strands and start adding little things like that. But again, you don't want to be too recognizable pattern. So you just gotta, its variance is the key. Rotate, let's get something going up like that. That color doesn't match, so I'm sampling a new color and rotating it out just a little bit like that. There we go. It's that easy. Using these brushes and just going across and adding as many as you want. Now for purposes of video, I'm not gonna go through and continue adding this because we'll be here for another 17 hours with this. But that's how I work with hair. Let's do a quick before and after from this view. Here's the before, here's the after. Before and after. These little fake flyers and hair strands. Now I'm doing the easier one, which is the layer beneath it, but we can add a blank layer to the top above it. And this is what I was talking about earlier. To continue to match the realism, we can use these brushes that I've made that are similar to a set of brushes that I found for free a long time ago, and this is kind of my version of it. So I'm sampling some color and I'm painting in my own strands of hair, and I'm making this really small, and I got to do things like that. And I'm going to change the flow of my brush to like 30% and just start painting in little fake strands that matches the overall tones of the hair that's already there and painting it in. This is also subsequently how I add variance into the stamps of the hair in the background. Just painting in a little bit as I go. Anywhere where I want to add a little bit of a brighter tone, I can add it in like that and go across. Now, let me do one more thing. I'm going to go back to this blank layer that's behind her, hit B for brush. Let's go to one of these bigger hair brushes like this. And I'm going to reduce the size, rotate it, and she's got a lot of flyaways because the wind was blowing. So let's sample a pretty even tone of hair. There's one that looks good. Now, since the flow of my brush is set to 30%, I'm going to change it to 20% and just start stamping in and seeing 10%. If I can make like just little telltale wisps of hair, like single strands that were kind of flying out a little bit. Let me go to my single strand here. I like this one a lot to do this with. So it's just a few little strands of hair. And we can pull it out, rotate it a little bit. Let's reduce it, sample some of that color. And again, we're just stamping in at 10% each time and creating just little like fake flyers that are coming away from the hair. Just a touch, just to see how it goes. And we can do that up here, you know, all these different places until we start. And I'm clicking 2 or 3 times. Every time I do it, stamping it at 10% flow and just building it up as we go. That's how I work with hair. And again, I'm going to give you a couple of different examples in the Retouching series where I'm working with a studio portrait as well as another outdoor portrait. But it is far infinitely easier to paint in hair using hair brushes like this and just seamlessly putting them together both on a blank layer behind the subject and one above them and connecting strands of hair that actually exist in the scene that got cut off during extraction. So let me see if I can find a really good example. So there's a strand of hair, this one right through here, that goes through and just stops. We could paint one that just continues to fly out. And that's what I do with those little brushes, the little 3 circle ones. I paint just following these natural little flyers that are already there, just continuing to extend them out across the edge and out and then curve down and connect back in. It creates a sense of realism and gives us the illusion that all of this was done for real and was not done for fake. I don't know. I can't talk anymore. Let's go ahead and finish up our composite and finish up this episode of the shop vlog today. So I want to start cleaning all of this up. So I'm going to start taking this away and I'm just going to try to match until we get to some of that detail, that sharpness in the grass. Of course, we're going to see her leg, which is a problem. We go, I'm just going to go the other way. I'm going to go a couple steps back in my history and blur this out. Yeah. So once we're ready to put this down into one final layer, then I'm just going to make a duplicate and blur that edge and take care of that when we're at that point there. But now, actually, I think we are at that point. I've gotten No, I need to address this one of her real quick. Yeah, that's what I want to do. So I'm going to apply the layer mask here, and then I'm going to duplicate the layer and hit Control Shift and A to take this new one into ACR so that I can warm up those or lighten up those colors. So increasing the saturation of green, the saturation of blue, brightness of blue, and the brightness of green, and then hit OK. Yeah, and that's matching up that water a lot better than what it was a moment ago. Okay, and giving us a little bit more there. Let's take that back into ACR as a filter. And I'm going to come up to the basic tab here and increase the highlights just a little bit more of the white point. And take the shadows out just a little bit more of that black point, and then hit OK. And that helped to match it just a little bit further as well. But of course, it made her brighter than I want her to be. So I'm going to put a white mask on this and just simply take it off of her face. It's not too bad actually on her face right now as it is, but I want to reduce that and then be able to carefully bring that back in on her body if we need to. There we go. Okay, good. And that all matched up and that looks pretty good. I really wish we could get more water in behind her, but I don't think we're going to have that option very realistically. I'm going to come back to the clouds. I'm going to give them just a little bit more blur. They feel just a little too defined still. About 4, I think that'll help. Yeah, that's starting to look okay. I like that a lot. So I think we're ready to compress everything down. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten it all into one layer. Now let's solve this base issue here. J for the spot healing brush tool, get rid of this little bit of plastic, and then we'll get rid of the actual matte line that we can see of that hard edge between these two layers that we created. Then I'm going to duplicate this layer by hitting Control or Command the letter J, coming up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and give it a 2 degree, 3 degree, not 23, 3, yeah, 4, hit OK. Put a black mask onto that, paint white onto that mask, and just blur out that edge just a touch more. There we go. I'm going to change the flow of my brush to 10% and just kind of feather it up a little bit so that we don't have a pretty definitive line there. Okay, that looks pretty good. I like that. Yeah. Now, I'm going to flatten this, and let's take this into, I'm duplicating the layer, Control or Command, letter J, going into ACR as a filter. I want to show you back at the color mixer here what I was talking about with the auto white balance issues with the yellow in her skin. So if I take the yellow out, let's look at her skin. So take the yellow out in her face. Yes, we can definitely see that it's going away, but it's the orange that is the predominant color here and what we're working with. And that's just a reflection. One, every human being on earth, regardless of your ethnicity, has orange and yellow in your skin. But 2, this is just a little bit of a white balance issue. So I can pull the orange out just a touch. Let's pull the yellow out just a touch. Let's come up to the basic tab and start increasing the global saturation of everything. We're getting some more of those blues and those greens. Everything looks good in there. And now we're globally affecting everything. That sky stock and the original image of the background are being affected at the same time. That's one of the first rules of compositing, is the more that you can tie everything together with some global change, the better. So I'm increasing the black points, pulling out the shadows just a little bit in the white point, and hitting OK. There, so we're seeing a little bit more rich warmth in everything and more color in everything, but we don't have to worry about her skin going too far. And I still think some of the yellow and orange could be taken out of it, but let's go on to the color grade and see from there. So different examples I've given in the different episodes here is using adjustment layers to do this type of work. So I want to use let's go solid color. That's what I always typically do. I'm going to add, and I do this for my own work. So ultimately, like, this is my method of color grading. I want to add blue. The new Pantone colors of the year for 2021 are crazy. They are crazy. So I'm not using them, and I'm going to use like blue, teals, and purples, and oranges, and golds, and stuff, and whatever I want to do. So I'm adding a solid color adjustment layer in a blending mode of lighten, and I'm going to pull the opacity down, and I'm going to pull the fill down. Giving us a little, it's making it a little warm, or cool, excuse me. I want to make it warm. So let's go into orange. You know what? Let's delete this, and let's use Adobe Camera Raw and its new color grading option that was new to the newest version of Raw. Color grading, here we go. Color grading, this used to be the split toning is what it was called, but now it's color grading, and it's similar to what you would use to color grade video or film in filmmaking. So we can add colors to the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights, and then change the variances and the blendings between those. So let's start warming things up. So for the shadows, I'm just going to give this a little bit of a touch of orange. Orange, you glad you're not a banana. Add a little bit of highlight yellow. And then for the midtones, let's give it just a touch of blue. Yeah, I like that. It's kind of cool. And I'm going to fade out the orange just a touch. Okay. And let's give the balance more this way, favoring those blues in the midtones. Okay. Let's come to the basic tab. We'll give it some contrast. Let's give it an increased black point, a little bit more white. Touch the highlights. Let's give it a lot of texture and globally adjust that. And we can give it just a little bit of clarity. Okay. Dehaze will increase some of the color saturation, which looks pretty good. Contrast just a touch more, a little bit of black, and we'll increase that global saturation one more time. There we go. Hit OK. It's a nice punch to color. It's a nice punch to the luminosity values and to the texture, which is addressing detail. I want to address the detail in one more way. So I'm going to make a high pass filter of this. So I'm duplicating the layer by hitting Control or Command letter J, coming up to filter, other, and then high pass. And that is entirely too much. So let's bring it to like 3 and then hit OK. Now, changing the blending mode of this to soft light is generally where I start, because as we continue to go through this, it's going to get harder and harder. There we go. I like that. Let's go back to soft light. Okay, that looks pretty good, and it's giving us a good sharpening. Then I'm going to make a composite layer of everything that, I'm just going to flatten it. And then duplicate it, Control J, take this duplicate into Adobe Camera Raw again as a filter. I want to add some more grain to that sky because it just doesn't match, in my opinion, and it's driving me nutso. There we go. Add some more grain across the board. Thank you, CCleaner, to let me know that it's time to clean my computer. I don't think I'm going to do the grain. I think I'm going to add noise. I think we need noise because those trees are just not matching to the sky. So I'm going to come up to Filter, Noise, and Add Noise. And then I want to make sure that it's set to monochromatic here and that it's Gaussian and not uniform, which means the edges are going to be a blur to touch. And I'm adding, let's go to 4% even. No, 3%. And hit OK. Now the trees look much worse because it did everything globally. So I got to put a black mask or hide all mask and then paint white onto this mask at 100% flow and opacity. Zoom in just so you can hopefully see this in the video. And we'll start painting white. Oh, I bet I'm on, nope, I'm on the right layer. Oh, I'm painting black. Whoopsies. There we go. It's getting close for me to be done for the day. So now you can see that noise and it's matching the trees a little bit more. And that's just going to give us a further sense of realism to this scene. So Control 0, it's going to paint big. If I go over onto the kid, that's not that end of the world. Go and into the trees just a little bit. Make sure we got it everywhere. Zoom in just a little bit. Yeah, I did go on the kid a little bit, but that's not that big of a deal. Everything looks fine because it's just a noise thing. So last thing I always typically like to do is I like to add a vignette to everything that I create, simply because I like vignettes. If you don't like vignettes, get out. I don't care. So I'm going to add a typical vignette that is easy to do, which is a solid color adjustment layer that is set to black. And then it's set to a blending mode of soft light. And then it has a mask on it for you to take it away. So I'm using G for the gradient tool, and I'm making sure that I'm on the radial gradient here. I'm making sure that my option is under the Basics tab, where I'm going from foreground color to transparency on the radial gradient and opacity of 30%. And then I'm simply just going to start dragging out a gradient across the scene like this. And just adding a little bit of that hint of a vignette around the perimeter edge. It helps to pull focus to the kid and just let us connect with them. So that's the retouch. That's the episode 9 of the shop vlog. Let's have a before and after with the original image and now our finished work of changing the weather like weather wizards. My final thoughts on this episode are going to be brief because it was a really long episode. Thank you for watching all of it. If you did, if you learned something in this and something new, let me know in the comments below. But my final thoughts, I want to call back to running a business and doing work like this in Photoshop. It is vital to continue to learn why things work in Photoshop and expanding your knowledge so you have an opportunity in business to be able to offer your clients more than their expectation. Yes, this is a solution to a cloudy day ruining the schedule, but think about what further you can do, what further artwork enhancements you can make to your own digital images, that with a barrier to entry of them paying for that service from you as an artist, can continue to add to their experience. They're investing in you and investing in the artwork. It makes them happy to do that because they chose you for a reason. And you can take the work further, meet their expectations, exceed them, and build a wonderful brand of art that people will be excited to be a part of. That concludes this episode today. If you like what you found in this video today, please give the video a like and consider subscribing to the channel because new content debuts each week in photography and Photoshop education. And when you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of that new content when you return to the YouTubes. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, I'll see you out there in the world of Photoshop.